Let's give a big warm round of applause to Thielen Kiksnoy. Kiksnosway. Potawatomi Cree from Walpole Island Reserve. He was giving us the honor song. 12 years old. Proud young man, proud of his culture. Miigwech, Kitchen Miigwech. I'd also like to mention we had as Eagle staff carrier Jerry Saddleback and James Dumont, and carrying the TRC flag we had Peter Short. Kwe aweti yihe onyamadero askenonia yes indirashriyo wendat endi yanionien ewayitio kuta Charles Bender Yatsi. Bienvenue à Numakage. Welcome to this historic event. Today marks an important moment in the shared history of Canada and the traditional keepers of this land. C'est une occasion sérieuse.
This opportunity is full of hope. This is an opportunity to come together today. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report. This is a document that preserves the past, but is also a document that opens the way to a better future.
Let's keep protocol in as it should be. We would like to acknowledge, I'd like you all to help me acknowledge on stage Chief Kirby White Duck and Claudette Commanda, who will welcome us to the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, the very territory we are on today. They will be accompanied by the Sacred Fire Keeper and Elder Peter de Conte, who will offer the opening prayer. So let's welcome them on stage right now.
Good afternoon. Bonjour tout le monde. Kwe kakina. Mon nom c'est Claudette Commanda.
My name is Claudette Commanda. I'm an Algonquin woman of the First Nation Katagandabe.
Representing my community of Kitagan, Zibi, and Anishinaabe Algonquin. And I say to you, Pijage Goma, Anishinaabe aki. Bienvenue ici à la terre des Algonquins.
Welcome to this Algonquin land.
Welcome each and every one of you here to the ancestral territory of the Algonquin people, a land that the Creator has given us since time immemorial, and where our children will celebrate and live here forevermore. Prime Minister Trudeau, it is an honor to welcome you here, and especially an honor because I remember at one time when my grandfather, the late William Commanda, when he welcomed your father, the Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Elliott Trudeau. So it is an honor again to welcome you. To all the elders, to the survivors and the families, thank you. Welcome you here. I welcome you. And I love you. Miigwech.
Good afternoon, everyone. I bring greetings from the Algonquin First Nation, from the youth, from our elders, from our residential school survivors, and the ones who have passed on. I bring greetings from them also. And on behalf of the First Nation of Pikwakanagan, again, welcome everybody here to this historic moment. I think it's a long time coming. And hopefully relations are going to improve. We think they're going to improve with the change in government. And hopefully the recommendations and the important, very important work that has been done by the Commission will be realized, and that the survivors and their families and their communities, because we all feel that the effects, will feel some relief and some improvement and recognition, and that things will improve over time. So again, welcome everybody here. I recognize the Prime Minister, and I just want to say greetings from the youth, who are very happy to see you and very to be Prime Minister, and always ask me, invite him to Pikwakanagan, invite him to Pikwakanagan. So I invite him to come to Pikwakanagan at some point to say hello to our youth. Yes. So, yes, it's been a long time coming. It's over 100 and some years where this has been happening to our people, our First Nations, in our territories. And I think it's time that we see that the government now will try to change that and bring back the things the way they should be, to have a more equal footing and more equal relationship, as was promised to us in the past. And I look forward to being part of this process, and I'm very happy to be here. So again, miigwech and welcome.
Miigwech, Chief Kirby. And now I would like to introduce our elder, Peter de Conte. Peter de Conte is an elder from the Kitigan-Zibi and Anishinaabeg First Nation. He is also a sacred firekeeper. And Elder de Conte will light the sacred medicines. He will conduct a smudge ceremony, and he will also say the prayer. Elder de Conte.
Quay, ik ken het cheek. Mi wech, kiwi ko me go aan be joyan. On the name of go. Hebben no G-shak, ben no ego, have kaji anavijik. Namad nan, no gum gajigak. Ugo, this way. Malula, like our dum tajik. She way sing, she way sinking ego. Mi wech stein abanik. Kina, avi kavido kawach. No, Ajak. We doen helemaal aan, we go. Wat je energie. Als je go, ik heb je, als in dat waar. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll see if I could translate what I just said in my first language. Today, we are here to honor the people that have suffered in the residential schools many years ago, and honor the ones that didn't come back to us or their homes, and to give thanks to the 3 commissioners that work to make a report and to try to get something straightened out on what took place many years ago. I myself was lucky not to be involved in that situation. I went through another problem when I was very young, around the age when these young people were taken away. I myself spent time in the hospital. Luckily, I didn't stay there more than a year, because at that time in 1949, the disease, all TB, was running rampant, and so I was put in the hospital and avoided that residential school. My parents did not want the people to send me to a residential school after I came home from the hospital. So with that, I give many thanks, and thankful to the commissioners that have done work, the work through the years. I myself have been involved in trying to help people that went through this ordeal. Ever since I was a young man, I worked with elders, learned their ways, kept the language, learned the ceremonies. Excuse me. And been involved with the DRC pretty much ever since its existence up till now. And so with that, not to insult anyone, I will do the prayer strictly as I was taught as a young man to speak only in the language that I was born and raised with, which is Algonquin Anishinaabe language. So if you join me in a prayer, we will pray for the people that are involved, the ones that are still alive today, which I have many friends who are, and the ones that did not survive. Kishamando, Nogum Gajigak, Kinambidanis Minonaje, and the Chiang. It's Mountain Dogo. Abidonji Shakawa Kajik Anivaj, Knamad Nan Kang, Rishkat. Ashes Ijimi Wetuigon Kakina Aitono Javirakamik, Ka Ijendaman, Usuaki, Anishinaabe Waki, Winter Anishinaabe I such Ijabitam, Kinajimino Segijamada Kaki, Ishigizes Pemusezen Sugijik, Wadokawach, Ushkaki Queme Anajikaranan was so Anishinaabe Waki. I the Bikizes. Kinavano Shope Mijiwaj and Coco message on it said Bikizes. Wadokawa was no nean Coco Messan. Ijaka Mews and Ijinaniki, Ajmin Uznitskain. Kina Ejimno Segjimadak, Ijibmadzian, Uneven Ichinoden. Abajitawang and Sugijik. It's an essay. Kakena Nibi and Agug, Ichigam, Sayagan, Sibin, Nibi Bang sing, Shid Nibi went among Wasa and Amakika, Miweche Kina. Ereshkine Penmuang, Mitigonsan, Mijash, Waashkul, Ilaneta Wimbaujai. Waigemen, Mashiki, Itigan Sangai. Okay, you go up and Moang Juis, Neang and Suijik, Away Sizak, Pneshwak, Kigonzak, Kinawin Naman Nabing. I should you Ninzoaganag, Ninzoagansak. We know how my way was, but Matzonewa, Ijuis Neang and Sugijik. Miigwech ideo jamando uche. Ereshno gumgajak, kavino anike sinanik, chayag, nushum sinanik gukum sinanik, gestuajan yabach. Ijiginamo adweshini nejen be madizwin, minob madizwin. Ugube munajik porgan. Ijiginamo was on Shayan Ijimunanage Poran, where Ijimunanage. We gave in our sap the vegan, who bemunage the vegan. Kakinamo was on Shayan Ijimunanage the vegan, where Ijimunanage. There's no Ajak enemy which now will go when the metage Jigagish Kamang. The Madzovin. Kayuaja was in the Christian Odungajmajaji. A Penimuan, Kenenet Yang and Suijik. It's we do watch. We do Koyaman, Kenenet. We know Kendanawe, Ejes Nagak, Bemadzovin, Ondinaka. Midash, mi West Virginia. Eskay nongum ajigak. Awina knows on the square dozen is go de seamen. Nongum et schab mission am the enabe is. Now in mind have knows is wish in it watch. Kashiba ajigan watch. I said to go ega abi iwe. We don't call the enabe is. It's a much cozy you watch. Song and the watch. It means the other any. I was so who go them taji. Chugaje or Sido watch Kinagego. Manos the enabe is it a much cozy. It a much ne pony ado was nongum. Ye kiduin. Kina Gajmajish Kaiban. Gajmajish young bank in Ennischian. Me nongum as you was in the man. We look ocean under enabe is a much cozy young, but magic in the man, and a schnabe waki. Pay and a schnabe in Raven, a schnabe in Shitchigaven, Kinama Gaven, Kakinoch Ajaminach, and a schnabe, it's a damage. Me wish rush idin Jamando. Me wish idigo. Thank you.
Miigwech, Kichimigwech, Elder de Conte, Miigwech to Chief White Duck and Madam Commander as well for these words of welcome. We'd like to remind people sitting in the room to please leave your seats for the people that were part of the procession coming in. A lot of these people are survivors or representative of survivors, and we'd like to make sure that these people have a seat. If you'd like, you can also go to the atrium. If you are out of seats, you can go to the atrium. The event is being broadcast right now in the atrium, and there's a place where you can actually stand up and dance if you so wish, as opposed to just be sitting down. I would like now to pass the mic over to the commissioners of the TRC. It has been a very, very long road to today, and we all look forward, I'm sure, to hearing their reflections on their work and their hopes for the future. So first off, please help me welcome the Honorable Justice Murray Sinclair, Chair of the Reconciliation Commission, to the podium.
Miigwechkas Kanastuk, Mizinagijik, and Dejanakas. Ego Dodem. Survivors, elders, national chief, other chiefs in the room, Prime Minister, members of cabinet, ministers, church leaders, and honored guests. I'd like to express my appreciation firstly for the young man who let us in here, Thalen Keklaswe, for his singing, his song. This is not the first time he has helped the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in our work. And it is appropriate, we thought, in asking him to do that we would be led in here today by our youth. For today is not just about an ending of the work of the Commission, it is also about a new beginning. And no one symbolizes the image of our youth other than those who walk proudly with our cultural symbols and bundles in their hands. So Thieland, where are you? Where did Thieland go? There he is. Thank you, Thieland. As Thieland, I just want you to stand there for a minute and listen to this. I want you to continue to walk tall I want you to sing loud and do that forever, my young friend, so that people will come to realize what could have always been because of you. I would also like to thank the elder, Peter Conte, for that prayer and for the welcoming that we have received. I acknowledge that we are on the unceded Algonquin territory, and we express our thanks once again to the people and leadership of the First Nations of Gitigan, Zibi, Anishinaabeg, and Pikwakanagan for welcoming us into their ancestral homeland. I would also like to acknowledge and thank the many Indigenous and non-Indigenous leaders who are here, as well as the many leaders of the several parties to the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement who are present, including Prime Minister Trudeau. My nephew, incidentally, you know, his mother's name is Sinclair, right? So that makes him my nephew. And all of the members of his cabinet who are present here with us. I would acknowledge them. I would also like to acknowledge the members of the various provincial and territorial cabinets who are here with us, because we know that they have come here today representing both actually and spiritually the provincial and territorial governments of this country, for whom this day, our commission and our report will have great implications. We thank all of you for being here. I would like to thank all of the survivors who are here in the room, and as is our tradition, I'd like to thank and ask all of the survivors to stand up for a moment and be here with us. Survivors, please stand. And the children and the grandchildren of survivors, please stand up as well. The nephews and nieces, all of you who are connected to someone who has been in a residential school. We acknowledge all of you here. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has finished its mandate. And as is our tradition, and as we have done in every one of our events, I just want to draw your attention to the two empty chairs who are here beside us. These symbolize the young ones, the boys and the girls who never came home from residential schools, and whose memory we honor in our report and whom we continue to honor. We have finished our mandate when we have come here today in order to deliver to you our final report. In a few minutes, we will unveil it to you for all to see, but allow me, if you would, a few minutes to make a few observations. Ours was a commission like no other, charged with the responsibility to unveil what Canada, as a government and as a nation, had done to and with the children of Indigenous people and societies since Confederation. Ours was inevitably going to be a journey of discovery that would be filled with challenge, with pain, with horror, tinged with sadness and despair, but also, perhaps surprisingly to those who were there, accompanied by laughter, by joy, by love, and by courage. That is because ultimately the story of the truth of residential schools in this country is a story about the resilience of children. It is a story about surviving. It is a story not only about their resilience, but about their courage and their ability to support each other. It's a story of their love of life, their willingness to embrace all that it took to be able to return to their homes, and their ability to bring us to this day. We know, of course, about the struggles and stories that they have told us about what went on in the schools, but they have also shared with us their struggles and stories as adults as well. It is a story about their lives after school, often with their own children and families to raise, and of their struggles to deal with the issues that raising children and families without having lived and been raised with families while dealing with the unseen effects of the trauma that had been occurring in their own lives while at the schools. And the truth about their past as children leads us to another truth as well, and that is that the future of residential schools is about children also. The hope of our Commission for Reconciliation in the future is that we as adults can make a commitment to the children of the future, our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren, that we will do what we can today to make their world of tomorrow a better place. We will lay the foundation of truth and knowledge not as a road of shame to be avoided, but as a story of human collision from which we can and have learned much. The vision of our work includes all of that and more from the last 6 years. As commissioners, we and those who accompanied us have been touched by all that we have witnessed, all that we have heard, and all that has been shared with us and with the rest of Canada. We cannot say that we are the same as when we started. We are not. But then again, neither is this country. This country, and many parts of the world, sat with us, transfixed by the stories of the survivors who came forward to share their experiences, struck by the fact that what was done to them, what happened to them, what they experienced was as children. Each and every one of us who listened to them would go home at the end of each day and we would hold our children and our grandchildren closer as we proceeded, not so much to protect them from some invisible force, but to gain the strength that we would need each day to go forth and to listen once again. We did this, after all, for those who were there and for those who were with us. We did this for the children who were taken away and for the parents who were left behind to cry for them. We did this for the children of today who needed to know where and what and why things had occurred, so they could understand their lives, themselves, and their future better. It is a good sign, I believe, to have such a range of people and groups represented here in this room today. It's a sign of the broad support for the work of the Commission and of the interest in and the commitment to the work that still lies ahead of us. Like the release of our summary report and the Commission's calls to action in June of this year, today marks both an end and a beginning. For many, including the Commissioners, today marks the end of a very long road. In order to complete our journey, we had the benefit of the efforts and hard work of the parties to the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement, and especially of specific individuals whose personal dedication have helped us to bring us to this point in our country's journey of reconciliation. I would like to begin by acknowledging all of the members of our Survivors Committee, all of whom joined us, stayed with us, walked with us, sat with us, cried with us, and listened to us over the many years that we were together. I would like specifically to acknowledge the many representatives of the church parties, but in particular Reverend Jamie Scott of the United Church of Canada, to whom I once said, "I see you more often than I see my wife." And it was true. to Stephen Kendall of the Presbyterian Church in Canada, to Henriette Thompson and Michael Thompson of the Anglican Church in Canada, and to Assistant Deputy Minister Andrew Saranchuk with Indigenous and Northern Affairs. All of you worked hard to ensure that the provisions of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement were carried out. And I would acknowledge as well Archbishop Gerard Petipa and Pierre Beribault of the Catholic entities, who worked hard to try to wrestle all of the complexities of those many different entities into submission for us to be able to deal with all of the things that they raised for us as well. We express our immense gratitude to them, as we do to the staff of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, many of whom were unable to be here with us. But I would particularly like to acknowledge Kim Murray and Tom McMahon, each of whom served us as executive directors during the Commission's mandate. All of our staff, all of those from the various parties to the settlement agreement, worked hard and with great determination for 6 years to bring to light the stories of our collective pasts as a country. And for that, I and all of the people of Canada, thank you. Over the time of our mandate, the Commission heard statements from survivors, gathered documents, and worked to create a number of calls to action aimed at addressing the damage that was done. The calls to action are centered around a core challenge in Canadian society, a broad lack of understanding of the unjust and violent circumstances from which modern Canada has emerged, and how the legacy of residential schools is part of that history and of our country today, as well as the basic truth that reconciliation is not an Indigenous problem. It is a Canadian one. It is one in which all Canadians are implicated. We must never forget that just as all Indigenous children were taken to residential schools and were told that they and their people were inferior, savage, heathens, and pagans, and that they were lucky that Europeans had discovered them and saved them from extinction through civilization and Christianity, the same messages were repeated in our public schools for generations. These dual and related myths of Indigenous inferiority and European superiority has caused all of us to think and talk about each other in very negative ways. Our calls to action address the important role that public education in the future will play to fix that. It is our intention that the calls to action will help bring about a new era for all of Canada, for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike. One of the most important steps for this country to undertake, though, is to do what it must and what it can to bring all Indigenous people within the circle of reconciliation. There are many thousands of Indigenous people whose treatment over the years mirrors that of those in residential schools, but who have not yet been fully acknowledged. The Métis are first and foremost among them. Many Métis children were sent to boarding schools not covered by this settlement agreement, and they still wait for justice and fair treatment. We have dedicated a complete volume of our report to their plight. The Indigenous peoples of Newfoundland, Labrador have been excluded, as have been those children sent to provincial and other publicly funded boarding schools for which the federal government disclaimed responsibility. Day school students whose experience of abuse and cultural loss were the same are excluded from this settlement agreement as well. Reconciliation will be difficult to achieve in this country, so long as so many feel so excluded. Their situations are also addressed in our calls to action. My hope that all things will be done about them in so many other areas, though, is strengthened by what I have seen from the people of Canada since we released our calls to action earlier this year. Without waiting for governments to act, individuals, groups, and organizations have made commitments and changes and started campaigns for reconciliation. Kairos, for example, an organization uniting Canadian churches, has launched a major campaign focused on the role of education and reconciliation, calling for the residential school legacy, treaties, and Indigenous contributions to Canada to be a mandatory part of the curriculum of schools in each and every province and territory. The Canadian Association of Statutory Human Rights Agencies has unanimously approved a draft motion that specifically commits itself to actively advancing and promoting the TRC's calls to actions related to the work of human rights commissions. We have seen universities and provinces across the country incorporating courses on Indigenous history, rights, treaties, and other subjects as mandatory elements of their school curricula. In a smaller but no less important or significant way, the Commission has received many letters of undertaking, such as the letter we received from the artistic director of a major theatre company in Canada, expressing his wish and his plan to create an Indigenous-related production in the coming year. Pope Francis' recent willingness to acknowledge the past offenses of his church in South America towards the Indigenous peoples there also gives us hope that he, on behalf of the Catholic Church, will one day issue an apology directly to the survivors of residential schools in this country. And the Prime Minister's recent statements and the ministerial mandate letters all contain encouraging signs that people in Canada will see meaningful action toward renewing the relationship between the Crown and Indigenous peoples, as seen through the lens of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and action in addressing the challenges faced by many Indigenous communities in education, in their well-being, and in employment. And the renewal, as well, of a nation-to-nation relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples, as stated in the recent speech from the throne, gives us cause to think that things are going to change. And of course, we are encouraged by the promise and the steps taken recently to establish an inquiry into the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls in this country. With actions and commitments such as these, I stand before you here, hopeful that we are at a threshold of a new era in this country, a point of fundamental change in Canada's story. A period of change is beginning that, if sustained by the will of the people, will forever realign the shared history of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Canada. Change, of course, will not be immediate. It will take years, perhaps generations. But it is important for Canadians to start somewhere and ultimately to create those tools of reconciliation that will live beyond today. With this in mind, we encourage the public and the federal government to continue to undertake to do things such as to look at the way that government is doing its business. Reconciliation will be hampered considerably so long as governments and their officials in this country see Indigenous peoples as a problematic part of society whose needs are best addressed through benevolent government programs. The social conditions that Indigenous people are experiencing in this country are, in almost every case, a direct or indirect result of past government policies and initiatives designed to assimilate, acculturate, indoctrinate, and destroy. When it comes to engineering the lives of Indigenous peoples in this country, governments have shown a disdainful mistrust of Indigenous capacity and a breezy belief in their own. For reconciliation to work and for a relationship to be renewed, there must be awareness, acceptance, apology, atonement, and action. The government must create a foundation for future leaders to build upon, with a proclamation on reconciliation, as contained in one of our calls to action, as well as a council for reconciliation, a body to oversee and to coordinate reconciliation efforts going forward. Finally, we ask that people in Canada support the creation of a covenant of reconciliation to be signed by all parties, as well as any willing individual from coast to coast to coast. Achieving reconciliation, as I observed in June of this year, is like climbing a mountain. We must proceed one step at a time. It will not always be easy. There will be storms, there will be obstacles. We will fall down from time to time. But we cannot allow ourselves to be daunted by the task, because our goal is a just one, and it is also necessary for our children. Remember, reconciliation is now ours to achieve. We owe it to each other to build a Canada based on our shared future, a future of healing and of trust. I am humbled to have been part of this. I am proud to have shared this journey with my brother, Chief Wilton Littlechild, and my sister, Dr. Marie Wilson. I am glad in a way, though, that we are at this point. I have a wife and a family who need me and whose love and support have carried me to this point. They have supported me in this work, but at great loss to the relationships we could have had, and which we will now try to recapture. They have all been concerned about my welfare as I went through this work, because they know that in the area of my own health and well-being, I am a reckless fool. I promise them I will stop. Thank you very much. Megan.
Thank you, Miigwech Justice Sinclair, for these quite inspiring words. Thank you for your dedication and hard work. Of course, your words have brought up some emotions. We have seen in the room that some people shed a tear. It has been something that has followed the Commission all through their work. They brought up a lot of emotions. I'd just like to underline the work of the health support that is passing out Kleenexes, glasses of water, just support to acknowledge the very intense emotions that are brought up by this Commission and by this report. And now I'd like to pass the mic over to Chief Wilton Littlechild to share his thoughts on the work that has been done so far. Chief Littlechild.
Totem teknikan kahkiutetam skadnao. Niistäkseen to naskuma anots. Eki sihtaa katsomuus neikan. Magepaksemo akuta tapaskumagak. Miu akuhtuun. Miu itsehtuun. Uhpintuun. Saagihtuun. Yksi paksemoak, yksi naskuma oksemanto. My name is Wilton Littlechild, as you heard, and I stand before you as a commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but also as a former residential school survivor myself. I'm also a lifelong competitive athlete, a lawyer, and a former member of Parliament. I began my passion for sports while I was in residential schools, especially hockey. It gave me an outlet to feel that I could be good at something, to feel good about myself, to find escape from the painful parts of my own school experience. I became a lawyer because I understood the law as a way to seek justice for the things I could see around me that were unfair. I became a member of Parliament because I understood that those who pass laws have the power to make sure that those laws are fair and just. In each of these areas of my life, there have been key factors to achievement. My elders, especially my grandparents, guided me. I knew who I was, my language, the ways of my people, and our ways of communicating with Creator. I learned about abuse as a broken trust, but also the positive value of discipline. I had food, shelter, family support, community encouragement, and access to opportunity, and parliamentary opportunity especially. I had financial means. I had encouragement from coaches, athletic teammates, academic classmates, and parliamentary benchmates. So the sports, the law, and politics, each field in its own way, trained me in the essentials for improvement and achievement. It takes individual effort combined with solid teams. Each of these factors is now both relevant and essential to the challenges our Commission is placing before Canada and all Canadians in our final TRC report today. We have captured them in what we call the principles of reconciliation. The first is a firm belief that Indigenous peoples have inherent rights, a right to identity, language, family, community, a right to spiritual expression, a right to survival as a people, and a responsibility to respectful relationships with each other and with the resources of creation that are essential to that survival. These are fundamental things that are captured in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And it is why we believe the Declaration needs to serve as an overall framework for reconciliation as its first principle. We also believe that reconciliation means respecting our own laws and our binding agreements. The treaties between Europeans and Indigenous peoples were at the heart of founding Canada. And there have been other modern-day treaties since then. These all need to be honored, respected, and fairly implemented. They also need to be taught and understood as belonging to all Canadians. Reconciliation means healing our relationships by being honest with each other, owning up to past mistakes, and making amends that include fair and equitable access to services, resources, and opportunities, so that we can begin to see healthier individuals and communities. Another principle is that we draw upon the guidance of Indigenous elders and the wisdom embedded in our oral histories, our laws and protocols, and in our connection to our lands and environment. In addition to all these principles, reconciliation requires the overarching discipline and determination of sustained political will. It requires joint leadership built on trust. the kind of leadership that recognizes and realizes reconciliation is a team endeavor, and that only strong teams can win the day. In that same spirit, we recall that different political parties designed and oversaw the residential school system over the past 7 generations they operated. Looking back, the responsibility for its harms must not be seen as belonging to any one political party. Going forward, reconciliation must also be understood as a nonpartisan responsibility and a great national opportunity. We need to work together as a team, as a country, in living up to the principles of reconciliation. I think we are off to a very strong start. Today, gathered together in this room, are representatives of various levels of public and Indigenous governments, faith communities, academia, various professional associations, the worlds of business, philanthropy, media, sports, and the arts, and advocates of human rights and social justice across all sectors, including many of our own TRC honorary witnesses. Many of you, individually and collectively, have formally indicated your willingness to serve as champions for the changes that we're calling for. That is the same combination of individual determination and team effort that has made winning possibilities in my own life, and is what our country needs now for reconciliation to take hold and endure to the finish line. Endure to the finish line, but with one difference. The only difference is this: I hope there will be no finish line for reconciliation. I hope we will come to realize that we are so strengthened by the efforts of encouraging and supporting each other and of working things out together that we will want to continue past any imaginary finish line. That true partnership between First Peoples and Canada, in the same spirit and intent of our original treaty covenants, will become our new way of being as a country, well beyond the work of our Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Thank
you. Chief Wilton Littlechild, as inspiring as ever. Thank you for your courage and dedication. I would now like to pass the mic over to our last but not the least Commissioner, Dr. Marie Wilson.
Great. Moi aussi, je vais prendre quand même un moment pour reconnaître.
I would also like to take this moment to acknowledge the ancestral lands of Algonquin people here and thank you for the wonderful prayers. Grandfather de Conte, and also thank you for the welcome. I would also like to acknowledge the wonderful song and chant from Phelan. It was so heartwarming to see.
All of you gathered here in this room. I think of so many other rooms where I spent so much of the last 6.5 years. Most of those rooms were much more modest spaces, sometimes drafty, often with no water but bottled water to drink, and once even without bathroom doors. Je pense aussi
I also reflect back on the thousands of survivors that live in all corners, in all parts of this country. Perhaps some people are here over the internet. And I also want to welcome you. Thank you for being here with us today. From you, we have learned so much.
You shared with us your devastating and yet inspirational stories of childhood, your experiences as children, times that were supposed to be safe and sound and happy. And there you were, removed from families and cultural groundings to be assimilated intentionally into white Christian ways of thinking, praying, and speaking, whether in English or in French. And I think of also today of the collective hopes that you have held for this day and for the days to come. Many of your voices still travel with me, in my heart and in my head. I can hear one man very close to me who said, "Make sure they understand the enormity of what has happened." And I hear another, very elderly, one who said he wanted to unload the burden of his residential school story before passing on. That very aged voice ended simply with this: "Do your best, my girl. Help them understand what happened to us and help them understand what needs to be done about it." And so we, our commissioner team, we have done our best to capture those many voices, and in our 94 calls to action, to capture the enormity, the hopes, and the needs. Today, we offer the fulfillment of our sacred promise to survivors, that your voices, your ruptured childhoods, sprinkled nonetheless with stories of friendship and resilience, that your voices will continue to be heard.
These voices we will hear over the coming decades through the Truth and Reconciliation Center that was opened just a few days ago in Winnipeg.
Our new National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, that virtual network that will make your stories accessible right across the country. They will speak also from the Indigenous language oral versions of our Truth and Reconciliation Summary Report, which we will be releasing and uploading to our website over the next 10 days or 2 weeks. And they will speak, of course, loudly and clearly from the multi-volume TRC final report we will release today. In our expanded volume on the missing children, we are also giving voice to the thousands of children our chair has already mentioned who did not survive the residential school experience. Here completely in our hearts today. We know that a quarter of you left this world without the dignity of having your full name recorded. A third of you left without anyone noting whether you were a boy or a girl. And fully half of you passed on without even the cause of your death being documented. Today, we include you in our challenge to the country, that much work lies ahead on the road to reconciliation, including the reclamation of your names and the reconsecration of your resting places. In a few moments, we will hear from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. In the context of this day, sir, you represent so much more than being the elected leader of our country. You also represent the largest defendant in the court case that residential school survivors and Indigenous organizations brought against the federal government and the churches who ran their schools. And that legal action forced the creation of our Truth and Reconciliation Commission as part of an out-of-court settlement. All other parties to that agreement responded officially to our TRC conclusions last June. But in the absence of any direct involvement by the previous Prime Minister in any of our TRC hearings or national events, today will mark the first time we hear an official response to our work from the Prime Minister of Canada on behalf of all the people of Canada. The Prime Minister's important national voice will remind us, as Justice Sinclair has reminded us already, that the residential school experience indeed is not Indigenous history. It is Canadian history brought about through Canadian laws and policies, and so it does belong to all of Canada to respond to the consequences of its own past actions. I am very hopeful about this. Among other things, I am hopeful because, you know, in recent weeks, we have seen just how capable of responding our governments and citizens really are. We have rallied around a common cause, the desire to reach out to Syrian refugees and welcome them to Canada. We are proving that we can work quickly and collaboratively to respond to what we see as urgent. I hope our country will help all our newcomers understand that each one of us here in Canada, wherever we live, lives within an Indigenous homeland. I hope newcomers will be encouraged to become part of a new national process of building respectful relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And I especially hope that our country, having now learned so much about the harms of its own history, will also look close to home in considering what we deem to be urgent. Urgent to begin addressing the critical issues we are raising in the volumes of our TRC report. Urgent especially to address the harms and to nurture the well-being of the Indigenous children of Canada right here in our midst. I want to end my cherished role as Commissioner where I began, which was with the encouragement and the love of my family. And I received a beautiful whisper across the floor there a few minutes ago from my daughter, who is here with me today, my daughter Jalen. But the other place I began, and where Justice Sinclair started us off again today as well, was in acknowledging and thanking the survivors. If ever we needed proof that the Indigenous peoples of Canada not only have much to expect of Canada, but also so very much to offer, that proof has been in the unfolding of this commission. For it is the survivors who fought to have this TRC, and it is the survivors telling of their stolen childhoods that has shaken us all awake. We thank you, survivors. We thank you, survivors, for provoking a national dialogue that is still unfolding and that is beginning to transform our country. It will be our final shared honor as commissioners to present survivors and each of the other parties to the Indian Residential School Settlements Agreements with a commemorative electronic copy of our TRC report after each one speaks today. But first, let me call upon my fellow commissioners to join me as we unveil the multiple volumes of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. Miigwech, Wilalio, Niawen, Nakumik Hai Hai, Gunashchish, Kleko, Kleko, Masicho, merci and thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Wilson. And thank you for the light you brought to these stories and the light you brought into the hearts of the people that had the courage to share. Thank you to all commissioners. I'd like now to pass the mic over once again to Justice Murray Sinclair, who will describe in more details the Commission's final report and talk about the electronic version that we will be giving of the document to all parties. Thank you.
Big Bird's over there telling me, hurry up, he's going to talk next, so he wants to get on stage. I'm not going to let him. I just want to briefly describe to you what's in each of these volumes so that you will understand the magnitude of the material that's in there. Volume 1 is actually in 2 parts. And each of those parts is 900 and some pages long. It's about the history of residential schools for Indigenous people. It examines the pre-Confederation roots of the Canadian residential school system. It also describes the history and student experience of residential schools from Confederation up to the year 2000. Volume 2 is the story of the Inuit and Northern experience. Too often left out of the discussion of residential schooling, the Inuit saw an expansion of residential schooling in the 1950s, and children were sent to schools that were hundreds, in some cases thousands, of kilometers away from their home communities. Volume 3 is the Métis experience. This volume chronicles the experience of the Métis people with residential schools. Changes in government policy meant that at times their children were banned from residential schools, while at other times they were the only schools that would accept Métis children. Volume 4, the Missing Children, an Unmarked Burials report, is concerned with ascertaining how many children died in the schools, the conditions that led to their deaths, and where the children are buried. It also makes clear that when advised of the circumstances that were contributing to an elevated death rate, governments ignored the opportunity to act. Volume 5 is the legacy volume. It examines the devastating impacts of residential schools and that it's had on the lives of former students, upon their families, and upon Canadian society as a whole. From the loss of languages and culture to the gaps Indigenous people experience in health, educational attainment, and employment, as well as to the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the correctional system and Indigenous children in the child welfare system, all of which connects back to residential schools. The final volume, we call our reconciliation volume, lays down the guiding principles of reconciliation as a foundation for advancing reconciliation in Canadian society. It points to the critical role that Indigenous peoples' cultures, histories, and laws must play in the reconciliation process, as well as the need for concrete measures to repair the damage done and to establish respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. And as each of the parties come forward, they will be provided with an electronic version contained in one of those silver cases of what's in the volumes here. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to walk with the weight of the books. I think they weigh close to 25 pounds each set. So we appreciate that. That might have been difficult for a few people to handle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miigwech, Justice Sinclair. I'd like now to call upon the representatives of the survivors to come on stage and give us a few words on the work that has been done. With us on stage will be Eugene Arcan, a Cree from the Muskeg Lake First Nation in Saskatchewan, 11 years in residential schools. We will also have survivor John Banksland from Inuvik, who will share some words with us. Mr. Banksland spent 15 years in residential schools. And we also have, nous avons aussi, Madeleine Basile, qui fait partie de la nation Atikamekw.
Madeleine Basile from the Atikamekw community in Quebec. She is a survivor of the Pointe Bleue residential school. Ms. Basile will be sharing her thoughts with us. Without any further ado, Mr. Eugene Arcon.
Nigan ista pokoyak na tamska. Utaga sosu ego utaga peto te egwa. Kayap chigo ga ta pagi chik visto kaki on the tamska. I say hello to all the people who are in this room and all those that are back home watching. To the veterans, to the elders, and those that helped us this morning, I applaud you for maintaining our culture and our traditions and our songs. Chief Bellegarde, Prime Minister, it's an honor to have you in our presence. And of course, the warriors extraordinaire who sit on my right. And last but not least, our families and those of the families of residential school survivors, fellow survivors. I want to deal first with the calls to action. The day before the interim report in June, the commissioners sat with the survivor committee, my colleagues who are here, and they explained the calls to action. The calls to action are just not challenges to the governments, various levels of governments. It's not just a challenge to the corporate community and all of the facets and all of the sectors that we're an industry of. The calls to action is a personal challenge to each one of us. Every day. Every day in the past couple of days, I've listened to the media and they keep referring to recommendations. These are not recommendations. These are calls to action. I wore these feathers today as part of my call to action for today, in honor of those people that maintain their songs, our languages, our traditions, and our ceremonies while we were away at residential school. My son presented these hawk feathers to me. There was a day that a First Nation could never be caught in public wearing a cap like this, decorated with hawk feathers. That's my call to action. I challenge and encourage all of us, no matter what color of skin that we have, to accept that challenge and take it on every day. Let's not leave it up to government, to the media, or others that may have a little bit of control over our lives to continue that control, but to share what's nice about life. We began our challenge 6.5 years ago with the Bentwood box. I was so pleased when I walked in to see it. That was our first meeting with my colleagues. This process, and I want to ask my colleagues to please stand. This process I got to speak today because I'm the youngest one. Madeleine's next, and John Banksland's the bossiest. But this process We were supposed to be advisors to these three brilliant, powerful, strong people. The relationship changed. We supported them. Reprimands were few and far between. Although I have to admit, I would have liked to have given Justice Sinclair a few bannock slaps. But it'd be, I know, you will too. But you know, it gave us a chance. Us, as one of my nephews would call it, us old fossils. A chance to become children again. We shared our tears, we shared our laughs, but we dug deep inside and we dug out the demons. And we couldn't have done it without each other and our wives and our spouses and our families back home and, you know, we're here. The fact that we're not alone also says we can't do this alone. And that's what reconciliation is about. It's usually you crying, and here it's me crying. One of my schoolmates at LeBret. But for Canada, you've been awakened. These three people have awakened this country and Mother Earth into the plight of Indigenous people, not only in this country, but the similar issues that have happened around the world. No one can say, unless you live under a rock or in a cave, that you don't know about this anymore. Canada, this is your rite of passage. If you really are a citizen of this country, take that next step. Get out of that protected environment that we were supposedly put in and take a risk and take that call to action. At the interim report, I had a chance to speak about the child that has been born out of this process. This report is one thing, but we also have a child. And that child is a National Center of Truth and Reconciliation. A chance for my fellow survivors, both male and female, to be grandparents and parents again. But also for the honorary witnesses to have a home, because the legacy that they're carrying for their children and grandchildren and the important work that they continue to do is worth no more or no less than the work that the commissioners, the committee, and others have done. That is the follow-up. It's there for all of us. I want to encourage everyone to take in the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. With the technology that's in place, it's not a problem anymore. I just want to, there's so much to say in so little time. There's a lot of unfinished business in this residential school agreement. I encourage those of you in positions of authority to do everything you can to maintain the promise that was given to residential school survivors when this whole process began. And that was that we would receive the benefit of the doubt in the administration of this agreement, and that has not happened. You have a chance to right those wrongs. Throughout this process, I have traveled with an entourage, not unlike prime ministers, Chief Perry Bellegarde. But this entourage, and many of you have met them, are my classmates. There is 9 of us alive from the 32 kids in this grade 2 picture at St. Michael's Residential School. They have traveled with me throughout this whole journey. Not one of those other children that passed on committed suicide. Other reasons of death happened. I pass this on to my granddaughter, Amzi, today, to keep it as part of her legacy. In closing, I want to say to everyone in this room, to everyone that's watching, my family that's watching at home, my extended family, tell your mom, you tell your dad, you tell your mushroom, you tell your kokum, you tell your uncle, you tell your auntie, you tell your brother, you tell your sister, your caregivers, your extended family today that you love them and give them a hug, because you don't know what it's like to go through a childhood and not having been told that you were loved or hugged. Thank you.
Madeleine Basile, Nijin Kazun, Wemontashi, Nibeutotan, Nimrerten, Uda, Epachikan Uda, Kdebendatsukan, Memashish, Genin, Ekijanede, au pensionnat. Ketin, Nebuguskerman, Kedemskuzian Unuch, Kedikstermid Zoanin. Miigwetcha the Dangabich et Nyahurumwan Amnuch. Bonjour tout le monde.
Good day, everyone. My name is Madeleine Basile. I am from the Atikamekw Nation of Wigmatashi in Quebec. Miigwech.
Birertamanuha Gudotkonik Migzio.
I just thanked Grandfather Peter for holding this eagle feather. It is a great day for us, survivors. Like a lighthouse, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission brought light. I want to thank the 3 commissioners sincerely. First and foremost, I want to thank my family. I thank my father Joe, my mother Thérèse. I thank my brothers, my sisters, my community. My husband, Alan, thank you. My children. I spent 10 years in this residential school. From the age of 5, we had just lost our father. At the age of 6, I was sent to the residential school. It's like being uprooted completely. Don't forget this. Today, I can feel my heart, I can hear my heart beating. I'm alive, Miigwech. Thank you. I am alive.
J'ai une pensée aussi aux survivants qui sont décédés.
I also think back to
Elle avait 9 ans.
the students who died. My sister was 11 when she died at Pointe Bleue. To all survivors that are here, those of you that lost a member in your family, in those residential schools, I am with you. My heart overflows with gratitude today because I am here with you and you are here. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here with us. Today, there was a great procession. I hope that all survivors will be able to, in a way, make this grand entrance into their own lives. You know, we survivors, we are strong. Let's be who we really are. I always said, I am what I am. That helps me. It soothes me. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada is like a lighthouse, as I said, shedding light. It shed light. It brought light into this dark chapter, from darkness into light. I want to thank Ms. Murray, Mr. Murray, little child. Thank you, Miigwech. I know they worked very, very hard. Today is the beginning of a new era for myself, my family, and all of us survivors. I would like to acknowledge all Quebec survivors here. I don't know if you can see me here through the web, but there is great room in my heart for each and every one of you. I have learnt to say I love you. Love, today, I am discovering this thing. I love you, Miigwech.
Merci, Madeleine. Bonjour.
Thank you, Madeleine. Good day. How are you?
And Inuit speaking in French, Monzi. Bonjour, Monsieur Prime Minister. The three commissioners, the Truth and Reconciliation, I'm mixing my words now, Survivor Committee members, my brothers and sisters I spent 6 years with. Didn't know any one of them except for Marie, I guess, or maybe Terry. But now they're very close to my heart. My name is John Banksland. I'm from Inuvik, Northwest Territories in the Western Arctic, where we're in the dark season right now, if you can imagine. I come to Ottawa, and it's raining. It feels more like Vancouver, I keep telling people. I don't know what's going on. I'm a survivor of 15 years of residential school, all in Aklavik and in Yellowknife. 11 years at the Immaculate Conception Residential School in Aklavik, run by the Roman Catholic Church, by Oblates, and by Grey Nuns from Montreal. I grew up with a variety of students from all over northern Canada, like I believe it was Commissioner Wilson that said some of our Inuit people travel for hundreds, maybe even thousands of kilometers away and never go home in the summertime, so they lose touch with their families. I myself am wearing, this is a parka cover, a very fancy one, by the way, made by my niece, Donna Bernhardt in Nunavik, and I am very proud to acknowledge the people that I am in Inuit from the Western Arctic, just not a native from somewhere. At one time, I was shamed to death. I was one of those students in school that was shamed to death for being who I was. But today I'm very proud to wear this parka cover as a signal for people that went through what I went through, not to be ashamed anymore as to who you are. I have 3 daughters. The oldest is in Edmonton. The second one is right here in front of me, Elizabeth. And the third one is back home, Onita. And I have a son-in-law with her, my granddaughter, Kellyanne. Very proud to have them here because there's a significance to this. Many of our survivors out there have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I ask my daughters, not often enough, but I ask my daughters who are well into their age now, have you ever learned anything about residential school when you went to school? Did you ever understand what dear old dad had to go through for 15 years? No. It's a sort of a blank. The unique part about this particular little item that I wanted to bring out is my granddaughter, Kellyanne, may learn a little bit about what the old man, the old granddad had to go through. Here I am, I'm speaking for a lot of survivors that will nod and say, yes, that is true. It was a blank. Today, I believe there are various governments, provincial, territorial, municipal, and thank God, Mr. Prime Minister, the federal government have acknowledged that this history has to become part of an education system that we all had to miss out on. I'm very proud to be here today to see that this commission has come to a final agreement, a final report. I'm 73 years old. I never even thought I'd be able to stand in front of you here and talk about my residential school experiences. Here I am. Thank God for that. And thank you, Commissioners, Mary, Wilton, Marie. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the survivors that have the courage and the determination to speak up and tell your stories, because it's very, very important. This country is made of people, not just of paper to read on. Thank you and good luck.
John Banksland, Miigwech, Eugene Arcan, et merci Miigwech, Mademoiselle Basile. We're just going to be taking a very short picture in front of the book, so I'd like to ask the representatives of the survivors to join the commissioners for this quick picture. And in just a few seconds, we will have the opportunity, finally, to hear words from our new Prime Minister. I remember being in June the host for the handing out of the recommendations of the Commission, and I remember seeing the then Minister of Indian Affairs sitting cross-armed and cross-legged as everybody was standing up to call for an inquiry on murdered and missing Indigenous women. I'm not going to say anything more to that effect. I'm just going to say that today we are a very big step ahead of that. Very big step ahead of that. As soon as our photographers and artists are ready, our photographers have taken the pictures. We would love to, yes. As you've seen, the report is not in any way a light read, very heavy, as Justice Sinclair had mentioned earlier. So now they are being given an electronic version of the document so that they may travel safely back home without having to pay for additional luggage, an additional luggage charge. And wasting less paper, I think it's important to mention as well. Wasting less paper, saving some trees along the way. Now, if you may, it's finally the time to welcome on stage the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau to come and address us a few words and remarks on behalf of the Canadian government.
Merci. Thank you. Gela Kasna, Masicho, Kuyanamik, Marcy, Welalan, Miigwech. Merci. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Extraordinary work. Thank you to Eugene, Madeleine, John, for your strength, for your stories. You know, John highlighted something for me. I went to some very good schools as a child, and throughout this experience, I can only feel guilty, but at least very aware of the contrast between my schooling and the experiences some others went through, the survivors went through, the families of the survivors went through, and those who were not survivors. And in the course of the good schools I went to, I remember one moment in the Canadian history class when we got to the chapter in the textbook on Indigenous Canadians. Good school, good teacher, good textbook, I suppose. And the teacher shrugged and said, "This chapter is not very interesting and not very important, so we're going to skip it." And we went on to talk about the Durham Report or some other such things. Well, let me tell you, the work that you have done here today, the work that all of you here are part of, will ensure that never again in the future of Canada will students be told that this is not an integral part of everything we are as a country, everything we are as Canadians. That is a promise we make right here, all of us together. I want to thank you for welcoming me onto traditional Algonquin territory. I want to thank the elders, the chiefs, the church representatives, and all parties from the House of Commons and everyone involved in the residential school settlement agreement who have come together today. Merci de m'avoir invité. Pour certains de ceux qui sont aussi ici aujourd'hui,
For some of you that are here today, the last time we met was in June in Rideau Hall. At Rideau Hall, at the ceremony that marked the end of many years of hard work on the part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. For all those who were there on that day, and just like all of those people, I will never forget that day. That memory is seared in my mind and will have an influence on the work of my government, the Government of Canada, on the path towards reconciliation.
Residential school students with us today or watching at home, thank you for your extraordinary bravery. Thank you for your willingness to share your stories. The previous government expressed this well when it said in its formal apology that your courage is a testament to your resilience as individuals and to the strength of your cultures. The apology also noted that the burden of this experience has been on your shoulders for far too long. The burden is properly ours as a government and as a country. Our goal, as we move forward together, is clear. It is to lift this burden from your shoulders, from those of your families and communities. It is to accept fully our responsibilities and our failings as a government and as a country. Seven years later, the apology is no less true and no less timely. The Government of Canada sincerely apologizes and asks the forgiveness of the Aboriginal peoples of this country for failing them so profoundly. At the same time, today, there is reason for hope. Today we find ourselves on a new path, working together toward a nation-to-nation relationship based on recognition, rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. As I told chiefs at the Assembly of First Nations last week, and as was expressed in our throne speech, we need nothing less than a total renewal of the relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples. This is a commitment that I and we take very seriously. In their mandate letters, I told government ministers that no relationship is more important to me and to Canada than the one with First Nations, the Métis Nation, and Inuit peoples. Let me say it once again. I give you my word that we will renew, and respect that relationship. Demain, je vais rencontrer des organisations.
Tomorrow, I'll be meeting with national Aboriginal organizations. We will begin an important and essential conversation on the way to move forward in light of reconciliation. Today, it is an honor for me to accept, on behalf of the Government of Canada, the final report of the Commission. This report is the result of over 6 years of hard work. It's often been very emotional.
Sinclair and Commissioners Chief Wilton Littlechild and Dr. Marie Wilson worked tirelessly and at significant emotional cost to themselves as well, with courage and valor, worked tirelessly to bring to light the truth about residential schools in Canada. They helped provide a safe place for those who suffered so that they could tell their stories and feel supported and heard. They struck a careful and compassionate balance between opening old wounds and providing survivors the chance to heal. And they delivered a final report that honors the courage of each and every former student and family member who shared their testimony. The final report provides a way forward for all Canadians, building on the formal apology of 7 years ago. It sets us squarely on the path to true reconciliation. The Government of Canada is committed to walking that path with Indigenous peoples in partnership and in friendship. In fact, that work has already begun. A national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is now underway. Ministers are meeting with survivors, families, and loved ones to seek their input on how best we shall move forward. Nous avons réitéré nos engagements de faire d'importants investissements.
We've reiterated our commitment to make major investments in education for First Nations and to put a stop to the 2% cap for funding for these programs that are for them. In partnership with Aboriginal communities, provinces, territories, and other important partners, we will completely implement the actions called for by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We will start by following up on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
And we recognize that true reconciliation goes beyond the scope of the Commission's calls to action. I am therefore announcing that we will work with leaders of First Nations, the Métis Nation, Inuit, provinces and territories, parties to the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, and other key partners to design a national engagement strategy for developing and implementing a national reconciliation framework, including a formal response to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. sur le chemin de la vérité à la réconciliation que nous parcourons.
On this path, from truth to reconciliation, we will continue to pay tribute to the lives and experiences of those that are no longer with us, as well as those that are here with us. We will remember that our obligation to one another transcends official agreements. This obligation also dictates our way of treating one another with respect and dignity.
We will remember always that reconciliation is not an Indigenous issue. It is a Canadian issue. Thank you for the opportunity to share in this important work. I am honored to be your partner and your friend. Merci.
Indeed, now is the time to take those cameras out. In just a few moments, we will get the opportunity to hear from some of the parties to the Indian residential school settlement. Yeah, I'm going to give you the time you need. Don't worry, you'll all get the beautiful picture. I might get one too. We never know. I'm going to be in the path of. Thank you very much, Miigwech Nyawangoa, Right Honorable Justin Trudeau. I've heard that there are many responsibilities calling upon him. Running a country is something along those lines. You might have to leave in a few minutes, so in case he doesn't have to say goodbye to you all, I'll say it on his behalf and on his staff behalf. I figure some of the ministers that are with us will get to stay with us as well. We will now have the opportunity to hear from some of the parties to the Indian residential school settlement. It's a settlement which gave rise to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission itself. And we'll just take a few moments. I'll make sure that Chief Bellegarde, there he is. So we have with us the National Chief Perry Bellegarde from the Assembly of First Nations. Let's welcome him to the microphone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Nista the naskamun kakiao no demptik no akumaganak. Kena naskum tino kakiao. Anamotaina smantu kena naskumtin. My friends, my relatives, I'm very happy to be here. I thank you all for being here and acknowledge the Creator again and give thanks for this beautiful day. I want to begin by acknowledging as well young Thielen, if he's still here. I don't know if he's still here or not, but I want to thank him for drumming us in and showing what pride can happen in our young people. I want to thank him, lift him up. Chief Kirby and Claudette, thank you for the welcome to Algonquin territory here. As well to Elder de Conte and Naskumtin for that prayer. Thank you so much. Prime Minister Trudeau, your heartfelt words, thank you for your commitment and partnership. To the ministers that are here, I lift you up as well for your hard work, your commitment. I also want to acknowledge the dignitaries that are here from across Turtle Island, friends, relatives, my colleagues, Regional Chief Gugu and Ghislain is here as well, Picard, and President Nathan Obed. I want to begin just with a few words for the survivors. Those that are here with us today, and the many that are not. I just want to say thank you for your courage. Thank you for standing up and speaking out, because each of you has experienced something that no one should ever have to endure. And because of your courage, no one will ever again. So I want to thank you for that courage, to all the survivors. Again, the commissioners, we thank you again and hold you up for all your hard work and efforts. And we acknowledged them last week in front of our chiefs at our Assembly of First Nations gathering, and we blanketed them, beautiful star blankets, and sang them honor songs for your courage and your sacrifices. I want you all to know here that the Assembly of First Nations will work hard to ensure that the 94 calls to action are implemented. They will not gather dust, and they will not be put on shelves and forgotten like so many other reports. 94 separate calls to action. Calls to action, and as Eugene said, not recommendation, but calls to action. And we question, will they ever right such terrible wrongs? No, they probably won't. But acting on the 94 calls to action can start the healing. Healing and reconciliation that is long overdue. And rest assured that time is of the essence. Mr. Prime Minister, you have promised your government will act. Thank you so much. We need your help, your partnership, and your commitment. And I know you are a leader that stands up for human rights and one who recognizes and respects Indigenous people's rights. And Canada is a country that defends human rights right around the world. And now it is time for us to take action here at home. Let us begin today. Today, I also have a message for the people of Canada. The ones that are watching, the ones that are here. You may have had no part in this dark chapter of our shared history, but you can play a role in rebuilding our shared future. It is no secret that the aftershocks of the abuse that took place in residential schools are with us still, but they need not be with us always. And I ask Canadians to imagine a future in which First Nations in Canada enjoy all of the same opportunities, the same services, the same quality of life that all people living in Canada enjoy. Imagine a future where our ingenuity, our creativity, and our culture is celebrated instead of wasted. We share a future. Help us to ensure it is bright for all of us. You can do that by taking the time to learn and to understand our peoples and our shared history. You can do that by helping to overcome and challenge prejudice, challenge racism, challenge discrimination, and by not accepting the status quo. On behalf of the First Nations in Canada, I thank the commissioners again for their work and their dedication and their commitment. You have shown the world that terrible darkness can be exposed, and in truth, we have found and will forge a way forward together. Ekuse, the Naskum Tinwa, hi hi.
Hi, hi, Chief Bellegarde. Now, once more, he's been given a copy, electronic copy of this very lengthy and very big report. The next person I will be calling on stage is with the Inuit Tapirit Kanatam, which is the national Inuit organization in Canada. I'd like to welcome on stage its president, Nathan Obed.
Commissioners, Prime Minister, Ministers of the Federal Government, National Chief, all our distinguished guests, and especially our residential school survivors and their families. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today, and thank you for having Inuit be a part of this wonderful day. I would like to recognize all Inuit across our 4 regions who have participated in the truth-telling events, who have led the process on behalf of all those who can't speak and all those who are no longer with us. This is very important to us, and for us to be a part of this process will be something that will be meaningful not just to my generation, my children's generation, but for all generations to come. And it is wonderful to be part of something that is forward-looking. Here we are today talking about the future of our work together and the great promises that have been made. And I don't want to repeat all the things that have been said today, but I will talk a bit about truth and about reconciliation and how it has affected Inuit and how I would imagine it has affected all Indigenous people in Canada. The truth that we now have in these volumes and the truth that has been said over the course of this entire process should change us. It should reach our heart. Those horrible things that have happened to those that we love should affect us, not just today, but throughout the entirety of our lives and how we live our lives. We've also recognized that part of the truth is that the way that we are today, our society, our communities, is affected by the truth of the residential school era. This is very important, and it isn't a truth that has been recognized enough. And I am happy to see that it has been a major part in the discussion about what today actually means. Then we get to reconciliation. And in our lives, as Indigenous peoples or as Inuit, we have to reconcile every single day. And whether it is about residential schools or many other things that have happened to our society over the past 60 years, we live it day to day. And the opposite of reconciliation is often conflict. And whether it's our relationship with ourselves, whether it's our family members, whether it's our community, either we are reconciling or we are in conflict with, there is very little peace. There is love. There is this middle space that isn't reconciliation and isn't conflict. But we are fighting every day to hold on. And often we find ourselves in the part of resolving why it is we are the way we are, why our families treat us the way we do sometimes, why we have to work together to overcome challenges instead of meet new opportunities. And so hopefully this work is going to build that middle space for Indigenous people in Canada, for Inuit in Canada, for love, for peace, for a society that does not have to worry about why it is the way it is, but just celebrates the specialness and the beauty of who we are as Inuit and as Indigenous peoples. Then it comes to the discussion about Canada and reconciliation. And we have the same dynamic of those of us who are reaching out to Canada for reconciliation and the amazing work that's been done by the Commission and all those who've supported the commissioners and all the work. And then we have the conflict that we know exists between Indigenous peoples and Canada itself. And then we have this middle space. And the middle space is much larger. And what is it filled with right now? Indifference, a little bit of empathy, a little bit of love. What will we do with that large middle space between conflict and resolution? We'll be fighting for resolution or reconciliation, but for what? For a Canada in the future that can have in its core, in its center, a respect, a mutual respect for its Indigenous peoples and all Canadians, respecting the rightful role that we play, and the fact that we make Canada better. We make Canada more diverse. Our languages, our cultures, our societies, they make Canada the wonderful place that it is. But we have to fight for that. And for Inuit, we've been fighting for that since we've mobilized in the 1970s, and we will continue to fight for that. And we thank the work that has been done here to help us in that fight. But I think we all have a part to play in that larger world that we all can dream of today. Nakomik.
Lakokmik, President Obed, for these very inspiring words. Next up, we have the representatives of churches who would like to share some reflections with us. The first person that we will call upon the stage is the Right Reverend Jordan Cantwell, moderator of the United Church of Canada. Right Reverend Jordan Cantwell.
Commissioners, former students, elders, Prime Minister Trudeau, National Chief Bellegarde, President Obed, fellow church leaders, friends. I want to begin by thanking the Algonquin people for allowing us to gather on their unceded territory, and to say that I am honored to be here today. The United Church of Canada welcomes the release of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. This is a momentous occasion. It is the culmination of 6 years of courageous and difficult work, and the result of 130 years of painful lived experience by former residential school students. Their resilience did not allow the shameful reality of the residential school system to remain hidden and unaddressed. This final report shines a light on a system that was never designed to educate Indigenous children. Rather, it was a tool to eradicate them as peoples, causing lasting harm to individuals, families, communities, nations, and cultures. The United Church of Canada accepts responsibility for its active role in this history and for our false assumptions of cultural and spiritual superiority. Indigenous leaders sparked our journey of awareness and repentance decades ago. Our church's 1986 apology to First Nations peoples emerged from their wisdom and guidance. In 2016, we will recognize the 30th anniversary of that apology and reflect upon what we have learned. We are still not where we need to be. And so we commit ourselves anew to the difficult and transformative work of healing and reconciliation. Compelled by the biblical imperative for justice, we have adopted the principles, norms, and standards of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as our framework for needed change. We will work together with our partners in Kairos, with the parties to the settlement agreement, and with others towards a new relationship between Canada's Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples, a relationship built on respect, equity, and mutuality. The 94 calls to action are a testimony to the depth and the breadth of the work before us, and to the hope that we can and will become the country we long to be. A country where the gifts and contributions of First Peoples, past, present, and future, are recognized, celebrated, and honored. The United Church of Canada has been and will continue to be deeply blessed by this journey. Thank you, Commissioners, for your good and faithful work.
Thank you, Right Reverend Jordan Cantwell, for your words, touching words a lot of people were, I'm sure, hoping to hear. The next person I'll call on stage is the Archbishop Gerald Petipa, representing the Catholic churches, to give us a few words.
I see that Prime Minister Trudeau has already left. But I want to greet especially our commissioners who have done a monumental work over the last number of years. They have really given a gift of their lives. And I receive not only the gift of the report, but the gift of their lives as we gather this afternoon. I'd like to be a bit personal in my reflections this afternoon. You know, ever since I've been involved with the issue of the residential school settlement, I've had to reflect that really I'm a typical non-Aboriginal Canadian. I grew up in a home with loving parents, with brothers and a sister. I got a good education. My father used to say to me, you know, the day that you don't learn something is a wasted day. And as I've become familiar with the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I've attended a number of the national events, I came away from there saying, I have learned something today. It's not always been easy to learn it. It's been very painful. As I sat and listened to the stories of countless former students who talk about their experience in the schools. It's not easy to hear those kinds of stories. But I would come away saying, I have indeed learned something. I've learned something. And now the testimony that we've heard from these many survivors is documented in the history that is presented to us. And it really calls us to honor the experience of their lives, of their youth. I know that the Roman Catholic Church ran the majority of these schools for the federal government. We bear a great responsibility for what happened in those years. Back in 1991, I know the first apology was given by the Oblates through then Father Doug Crosby, who is now the Bishop of Hamilton. And it's obvious that the reality of the schools began to dawn upon us, begin to realize what we've done. We may have thought that we were doing good work, and to realize that even for all of those good intentions, it wasn't always good that came of it. And we have to live with that. We have to try to deal with it. We come to the point now where we have to move forward. One of the questions that Justice Sinclair used to pose many times in my hearing, he would ask the question, what is reconciliation? What does that look like? And so I found myself reflecting on that a great deal. What is reconciliation? How does it come about? And I've come to realize that it isn't so much a destination. Reconciliation is a way of life. It's a way of life. And it's how we have to live our lives as Canadians. Not just in terms of residential school. I think this has become sort of a paradigm for the rest of our society. We need to be reconciled with ourselves, reconciled with one another, reconciled with our environment, with our world. This is a huge task and could be, as I say, a paradigm for everything that we do. I commit myself personally, and I will continue to bring before my fellow bishops in Canada and fellow religious leaders the calls to action of the TRC. I think there's a monumental task ahead of us. This is not going to be easy. In some ways, this afternoon has felt like a graduation, a high school graduation, and our commissioners have graduated. But, you know, at graduation ceremonies, we remind the students that really they're, you know, this is not the end of anything. This is the beginning. It's a point along the way. And so I also will. I think that on Christmas Eve, I'm going to be going to 2 communities in the Little Red River Cree Nation in my diocese. I'm going to celebrate Christmas Eve Mass in Garden River and in John Doerr Prairie. And I'll do that very happily. I'll be well received by the people. And I'm going to speak to them. It's Christmas. I know it's about celebrating the birth of Jesus. But as we think about that child Jesus, who was loved by his mother and Joseph, Mary and Joseph, that in a sense, this is what we wish for all of our people today. I'm not going to rag the puck. Thank you very much for this opportunity to be here today, to honor our commissioners for the gift that their life has been to us over the last 5-6 years, to thank them. Thank you for your listening to me. God bless you all.
And thank you, Archbishop Petipa. Now will be time to pick up your very own version of this lengthy and important document to bring home to your peers and colleagues. The next person I will welcome on stage is the Archbishop Fred Hiltz from the Diocese of the Anglican Church. Please, Fred Hiltz. Yes.
Good afternoon, survivors, elders, national chief, commissioners, Prime Minister, although I know he's had to leave, but ministers of cabinet who are still present, and all who are gathered in this place today with hope. I want to say a very sincere thank you to the commissioners, Dr. Marie Wilson, Chief Wilton Littlechild, and Chief Justice Murray Sinclair. Thank you for all of your labors in the last 6 years. Unwaveringly, and I've been at all the national events except one, you placed the survivors of the residential schools at the very center of every community, regional, and national event you hosted. I want to say thank you for helping me and for helping all Canadians to listen, to wake up, and to learn about this sad chapter in our history as a country. Thank you for your role in birthing the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation in Winnipeg. Thank you for calling the Government of Canada and the churches who ran the residential schools, including my own, for calling us to account. For our participation in an inherently arrogant and flawed policy of assimilation to address the so-called Indian problem, and for every form of abuse experienced by survivors in those schools. Thank you, Commissioners, for your report and your 94 calls to action. Grounded in the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, these calls represent so much hope for Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island. And they represent such a great opportunity for the healing of this country. You've given us a roadmap, as you said, for the journey ahead. And what a delight it has been today for us to have in our very presence our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. What a delight to hear of his personal resolve in a renewed relationship with Indigenous peoples in this country. What a delight to hear him making the calls to action a priority for the Government of Canada. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Canadians stand ready, willing, and excited to work with him and his government. T.S. Eliot wrote these words: "What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning, for the end is where we are start from." This is such a time for Canada. It's an historic day, it's a sacred moment. We are being called to tread more gently upon this earth, to walk more humbly one with another in the presence of our Creator, and to work together in bending the arc of time toward justice for all. On behalf of the Anglican Church of Canada, I pledge to First Nations, Inuit, and Métis of Canada our very best efforts as a church in honoring the Commissioners' work and their calls to action. Our church embraces them in the spirit with which we all prayed the Remembering the Children prayer at the very outset of the TRC. It reads in part, "In speaking and hearing and acting upon the truth, may we as individuals and as a nation meet the hope of a new beginning, where justice walks with all, respect leads to true partnership, and the power to change comes from every heart. Hear our prayer of hope and guide this country on a new and different path." Miigwech.
Thank you for your words, Archbishop Hiltz. The next person I'd like to invite on stage is the Reverend Karen Horst from the Presbyterian Church in Canada, who will share some words with us as well. Karen Horst.
I also acknowledge the territory of the Algonquin peoples with thanksgiving for the stewardship of this land. Survivors, elders, commissioners, our Prime Minister, colleagues, and partners in this ongoing journey of reconciliation. With others who have spoken this afternoon, I'm privileged to be present today on behalf of our church, and our denomination welcomes and honors the final report of the Commission. Over the past 6 years, we've witnessed the tremendous dedication of our commissioners, and we celebrate all of their work. We thank you for that work, and we assure you of our continued prayers and anticipate all of the new challenges that you may take on, and hopefully, perhaps even the enjoyment of some rest in the future as well. We have witnessed and heard the painful testimonies of many survivors whose truth is now, in part, contained within these 7 volumes. And we salute the courage of all who have contributed to the hearings publicly and in private. We also acknowledge those who did not feel they could speak through this process and respect your experience as well. We remember those who have died before, not being able to tell their personal story. And especially we remember the many children who did not return home. And so I speak today with mixed emotions, along with ongoing sadness and shame. We recognize the legacy that has been established and that the way that the church played a part in all of this. But I also am encouraged and am hopeful. I'm encouraged because I know that many more Canadians, and certainly far more Presbyterians, know the legacy of the residential schools. And all of us are better informed because of the work of the Commission. I'm also encouraged that so many people are deeply committed to carrying on the journey of reconciliation, the journey that's begun today. And I come today with hope, knowing that the Commission has given us the tools that we will need for the journey forward, both on this momentous day with its reports and the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. We are now far better equipped to continue to hear and study the truth, to combat the ongoing effects of colonialism, and to advocate for justice in those areas of Canadian society where the gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous remain far too wide. Education, safety for women, clean water, access to health care, reasonably priced food, land, and housing. Our church is committed to staying on the journey of reconciliation and to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and with all people of goodwill who share the common vision and challenge for our country that the Commission has laid before us. In the spirit of healing and reconciliation, Megwish.
Thank you.
I also acknowledge the territory of the Algonquin peoples with thanksgiving for the stewardship of this land. Survivors, elders, commissioners, our Prime Minister, colleagues, and partners in this ongoing journey of reconciliation. With others who have spoken this afternoon, I'm privileged to be present today on behalf of our church, and our denomination welcomes and honors the final report of the Commission. Over the past 6 years, we've witnessed the tremendous dedication of our commissioners, and we celebrate all of their work. We thank you for that work, and we assure you of our continued prayers and anticipate all of the new challenges that you may take on, and hopefully, perhaps even the enjoyment of some rest in the future as well. We have witnessed and heard the painful testimonies of many survivors whose truth is now, in part, contained within these 7 volumes. And we salute the courage of all who have contributed to the hearings, publicly and in private. We also acknowledge those who did not feel they could speak through this process and respect your experience as well. We remember those who have died before, not being able to tell their personal story. And especially we remember the many children who did not return home. And so I speak today with mixed emotions, along with ongoing sadness and shame. We recognize the legacy that has been established and the way that the church played a part in all of this. But I also am encouraged and am hopeful. I'm encouraged because I know that many more Canadians, and certainly far more Presbyterians, know the legacy of the residential schools. And all of us are better informed because of the work of the Commission. I'm also encouraged that so many people are deeply committed to carrying on the journey of reconciliation, the journey that's begun today. And I come today with hope, knowing that the Commission has given us the tools that we will need for the journey forward, both on this momentous day with its reports and the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. We are now far better equipped to continue to hear and study the truth, to combat the ongoing effects of colonialism, and to advocate for justice in those areas of Canadian society where the gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous remain far too wide. Education, safety for women, clean water, access to health care, reasonably priced food, land, and housing. Our church is committed to staying on the journey of reconciliation and to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and with all people of goodwill who share the common vision and challenge for our country that the Commission has laid before us. In the spirit of healing and reconciliation, Megwish.
Thank you very much, Reverend Horst. Our journalists and members of the media will be very happy that we are soon moving on to the press conference. Of course, we will need a few minutes to drum out the Eagle staff. As we are doing so, in just a few moments, we will ask you to please stand while we do the honor song and as the Eagle staff and the flags are being carried out. We will have a short guesting, so people, a short moment so that people can gather in the atrium for some refreshments. That will be available as well. And if you want to stay in the atrium during the press conference, the whole thing will be broadcast in screens over there. For the people who will stay in the room, we will ask you very kindly to please speak as little as possible, or just speak as quietly as possible, so we can make sure that the questions are being answered and understood. What's your name? I'll say, Ayatel has just mentioned, and it's always sad when we have these things happening on the community. Her nephew, I believe, committed suicide, and he's being buried right now. So these, as we know, are still the results in often cases, and in too many cases, of the intergenerational effects of residential schools. And hopefully, even though the darkness still seeps in many, many cases, we definitely hope that what has happened today will be a bringer of light for our friend here, her nephew, and all of her family, and any other families that are still suffering through these things. I figured we might have a drum ready to... Right away? Okay, so we'll move right away to the press conference. As I've mentioned before, if people would like to gather in the atrium for some refreshments, you're welcome to do so. Medias and press, you're welcome to stay in, and we'll start the press conference right now. The media and press, nous aimerions rappeler aux journalistes que nous allons vous demander une question. Pour commencer, we'll ask each journalist
one question.
Essential question. We want to make sure that all media get a time to ask an important question. Nous aimerions nous assurer que tous les médias ont le temps de poser au moins.
We want to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to ask one question if there are any follow-ups.
To moderate it, but I might have to stop you or to interrupt the answer if it goes on too long to pass on to the next media. Merci. Thank you. So I'll open the floor to questions. So we have a journalist that is already at the mic, so go ahead.
Justice Sinclair, we heard from the Prime Minister today who said that it's now time to move forward and lift the burden from the shoulders of Indigenous people and to accept fully, I'm reading his words, our responsibilities and our failings as a government and as a country. What's the significance of that?
I think it clearly indicates, excuse me, I think it clearly indicates that we have a point now in our conversation where we are past the point of having to prove the validity of what it is that we've said in our report, and that now the conversation moves more onto a question of what is going to be the plan of action going forward. And we've always felt that the important threshold was to get past the awareness of Canadians of this issue. And I think we're well past that now.
And just as a quick follow-up, the Prime Minister used wording that I don't know what it means, to be honest. He spoke of a national engagement strategy to develop a national reconciliation framework. Do you have concerns that that might be bureaucratese for doing nothing? How quickly do you want to see things get done here?
I want to see things done quickly. I'd like to see things done in my lifetime, but I'd like to see things done within the next year or two. We have a plan of action that we can all identify and work with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next one.
Just to follow up, Justice Sinclair, on the plan of action, you'd also talked in our interview this morning about how the Prime Minister's been saying very nice words, but you'd really like to see some sort of actual plan of action to implement the calls to action. He did talk today about the inquiry and what's in the cabinet mandate letters and the speech from the throne, 3 things that you mentioned as well. But in terms of an actual plan of action, what specifically do you need to see to be confident that they're going to be moving forward on the 94 calls to action?
I'm not sure that I need to see a specific plan of action on those issues. What we've called for is we need to know how they're going to go about looking at the calls to action that we have identified for the federal government, such as the Council on Reconciliation, the adoption of the framework, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People as a framework for reconciliation, and the Covenant on Reconciliation, as well as the Royal Proclamation that we've recommended. And those are things specific to the federal government. We know that it's going to take a concerted effort for all of the parties working together to implement all of the calls to action. And that's how I understood his indication that he was going to be calling together the parties on how to implement our calls. But specific parties have specific abilities that they can do on their own, and that's what they should be doing. Next.
Mr. Justice, I'm just posing a question to see what you think of it. I'm just wondering what you would think of the possibility of challenging the Prime Minister and the Premiers to abolish the Senate and to make the Chamber a centre of an Aboriginal centre of Canadian unity. Because it's been there for 150 years and it's been abused. So the money and the facility would be on sacred ground, it would be presence here. in the area, and I think it would make a difference for the country. And the second thing I wonder if it would be helpful, the Aboriginal people are well known for females playing significant, substantive roles throughout all of their history. And I challenge you to be supportive of this, the Senate, and the idea of changing our Constitution from being in all thy sons' command, which is ridiculous, there are more than 50% female, to change the Constitution.
Get to your question, please. Give me a question.
Change the anthem to all thy kin command, so that we have a chamber, all the money and all the facility becomes a centre for Aboriginal excellence right on native Aboriginal land.
Thank you for your question. It's an interesting comment. If
Food for thought for another time.
Indeed.
I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't try to hijack our calls to action and make yours part of it, because it's not part of our calls to action. Yes.
Question for Dr. Wilson. I was struck by your reference to the Syrian refugee crisis and the way that it has galvanized public attention. And I'm wondering, in the 6 or so months since your preliminary report, whether you have seen that kind of galvanization of public opinion around this issue.
Well, I think that's part of what Justice Sinclair talked about, and Commissioner Littlechild as well, when we talked about not only the representation, which is very diverse in the room here today, but also the wide range of both government and professional associations who have come forward on their own to voluntarily say, here are the things that we are pledging to do, here are the efforts that we are going to be making. And for me, that is an expression of a galvanization. These are groups that have influence, that have resources, that have fora, for reaching out to their memberships and who are saying, we're going to do our part. So I think that as that continues to grow, that momentum, things could have died off in June, they definitely have not. And as that continues, and as things start to shift, as our children start to understand what happens, and as they begin to go home and teach their parents who have not yet learned, things can start to change, and I'm very hopeful that it will.
Justice Sinclair, hello from Grandmother Pauline.
Hello.
My name is Sue Enberg. I just have a question. The Harper government had a tendency of ensuring that the history of genocide was hidden by obstructing documents and obstructing justice. How can we ensure that moving forward, this does not continue?
I think on October 19th, Canada made that decision. Thank you.
Mr. Sinclair, I just have two quick questions. Yesterday, you had said that since June, when we'd heard initially, that the numbers of Indigenous children who had been possibly killed, the number had increased. And I'm just wondering, from the number from June, 6,000, to what you had thought might have been the case yesterday. I'm just wondering what was the difference and maybe what caused that.
You need to listen carefully to what I said. What I said in June and what I said yesterday was no different. We have identified 3,200 names of individuals who died in the schools. We estimated that it's probably at least double that, and I don't have any difficulty in those who estimate that it's probably 5 to 10 times that, because right now we do not know for sure what the numbers of children who died in the schools. When you look at the analysis that was done, the only analysis that was done was by Dr. Peter Bryce back in the early part of the 20th century. You looked at a specific number of schools in a specific time period, and based upon that analysis, the projection over the longer period that schools were in existence could put the number easily at 10 times what we've estimated. But at this point in time, we've identified 3,200 names. And we think there are probably more, which is why we've established a call to action which says we need to do more research about that.
My second follow-up question is just about the calls to action. The 94 calls to action that the Liberal government has promised. I'm just curious as what you think. How do you foresee this happening for them?
The implementation
Yes.
of them? Well, there are certain calls to action that are specific to the federal government, and they have to look at those. In addition to that, there are specific calls to action that will require joint effort on the part of provincial and federal governments along with Indigenous governments, and we think that those kinds of calls to action require for joint effort, and that's why the Prime Minister's calls for there to be a a joint implementation strategy put together for those makes a lot of sense to us. In addition to that, there are some calls to action that are specific to provincial governments and specific to other entities as well, including private industry. Those entities have actually begun to step up to the plate, and those are the ones that we indicate and indicated in our remarks have actually been doing something since June.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, if I could just add a word to your earlier question about the children. In my remarks, you may remember I talked about the number of children who died, and we didn't know if they were boys or girls. We had only part of a name. And the significance of that is that not only, of course, does it underscore the incredible indignity with which their little lives were handled, but it also makes the counting very difficult, because you don't know if first name child X and last name child Y are the same child, or are they two different children? Are we double counting if we count both of them, or are we underestimating if we count only the one? And so it needs much more cross-referencing of many, many, many more documents that have only quite recently become available to the National Centre, and which are still coming in dribs and drabs from a few of the remaining churches. That will take a long time with very serious cross-referencing and analysis to try to get the truest possible picture. And the truth is, we probably never will know with precision, just precisely because of that.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now be moving on to the next part of the press conference. I'd like to ask the Perry Bellegarde of the Assembly of First Nations on stage. Inuit Tapirit Kanatami Nathan Obed, if he's still with us. I figure Carolyn Bennett from the Government of Canada, our Minister Carolyn Bennett of Indian Affairs, should be, she's on her way, and the survivor representatives and church representatives to take questions as well.
Yeah.
Nathan can't join you. He's live 4 p.m. So just so you know.
No worries. There may be no questions, and I'm fine with that.
Making the changeover as quick as possible. I know most of the media have a deadline to meet as well.
Sure. Right in the middle. You got it. You guys are both very loud, so we're good. Yeah.
So once again, I'd like to call on all representatives of churches and survivors to come and take their place at the table. And we have with us Perry Bellegarde from the Assembly of First Nations, and Carol Bennett, Minister of... I don't remember the name of the ministry. It's changed. Indigenous Affairs and Northern Affairs, or it's back to INAC, something that is very similar to INAC, if I'm not mistaken.
Instead of just a TRC groupie.
That's the headline now, Minister.
All right, we are open for questions, so please go right ahead.
Hi, it's Joanna Smith with the Toronto Star. My question's for you, Minister Bennett. I just saw a quote on social media, I think it was from Windspeaker News, that sort of stood out to me, and it says, "Dear Canada, the truth hurts, reconciliation will also hurt, but it will be worth it." And I don't know what they mean precisely by hurt, but I imagine it could be different things. It's the sadness that comes from the stories. It's the economically money, perhaps, that needs to be put in this issue. It's a whole reworking of the relationship. So what do you tell Canadians who may be fearful and reluctant to come aboard this project, and what it might mean for how we view our world and how we go about our daily lives, that it will hurt, but it will be worth it?
I think the truth has hurt us all in terms of what we didn't know, and how poignant it was hearing it again, particularly when you hear directly from survivors. I think that Canadians now want to know more. They know what they didn't learn in school. And I would say, Joanna, from wherever I go, people are wanting to know what they can do to be part of this next chapter, which is the reconciliation chapter. And I just think that reconciliation means that you are always dealing with the truth that hurts, but it also is about being part of the healing and about going forward. not only for the survivors, but to honor the amazing work of the commissioners that was so difficult. But it is the future of Canada. It is, as the Prime Minister has said, the unfinished work of Confederation, and it's something that we need to share with every single Canadian if we're going to get this right.
Minister Bennett, the Prime Minister announced that there will be a national engagement strategy to develop a national reconciliation framework. Can you tell me what that means? Who's involved, and how quickly will we start to see action?
Well, as you know, Mark, that we've right now have begun the work on the pre-inquiry of the truth of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and we are beginning the work on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and how we will begin that implementation across all government departments, provinces and territories, municipalities, the private sector. We are just now beginning to engage with all of the participants as to what would a reconciliation framework look like, and how can we be held accountable for making significant progress on the calls to action that we have committed to make sure happen.
Yep, next question.
My follow-up to Minister Bennett, I just wondered how long you foresee the 94 implications. How long do you think something this large could take?
Again, it is, some of them are already happening. And so we will want a quarterly report on how we're doing on things, and we're going to try and be as transparent and accountable as we can. But we are also going to celebrate the partners as the commissioners and the national chief and others are celebrating that, and that the churches, that the recommendations that are squarely in our court, we will be accountable for. The ones that are shared with provinces and territories, the ones that are shared around curricula, and those interesting things that we're already seeing happening. We're thrilled to see the universities already meeting and already taking up the torch on the ones that they see are there. So again, I think our responsibility as the Crown is to keep track of how these 94 calls to action are going, but we are very heartened by how all of the other levels of government and other sectors are taking up their responsibility and their role, and working with us, working with First Nations, Inuit, Métis, and I think that one of the things that we've heard a lot is that the survivors want to stay involved in this, that they will be making sure that we're doing this right, as well as we know the commissioners, as they said to parliamentarians last week, they won't be very far away, and will be also making sure that their intent in the calls to action are interpreted properly and carried out properly.
Just as well, further to Minister Bennett's comments, when you look at the 94 calls to action, the federal Crown and federal government is going to be responsible for certain ones, no question, here, especially in the area of languages. But when you start looking at the role of the provincial governments as well in terms of curriculum, and changing the curriculum so that every school in every province and territory teaches treaties and Aboriginal rights, teaches about the residential schools. That's important for the provinces, and it's already starting to happen in Saskatchewan and Manitoba and Ontario. BC are starting to talk about it. Even in when it comes to preserving, enhancing, and recognition of Indigenous languages. The Northwest Territories has already declared the 11 or 12 Indigenous languages in the Northwest Territories as official languages of the territory. So certain things are starting to happen. So the federal Crown, federal government, responsible for certain things, provincial Crown, provincial government, certain things, universities have a role to play, church groups have a role to play. It really is a Canadian reconciliation pathway all along.
One of the things I was just speaking to Cindy Blackstock about in terms of how the Commission's calls to action start with children, and how that also means that we feel that we should start immediately with some of the things we can do already on the issues facing Indigenous children in Canada. And I was very heartened with my my conversation with Charlie Angus as to maybe that would be a piece of work that the parliamentary committee could begin with in terms of child welfare. So I think that again, everybody wants to do what they can, and it really. Since June, since the 94 calls to action were first announced, it is quite extraordinary to see how much work that's already being done.
Thank you. One more question.
Thank you. Honorable Caroline Bennett, National Chief, Perry Bellegarde, this question goes to you. One of the volumes that was mentioned during the presentation today was about those who were not included in the residential school settlement. Right now there's a class action suit for Indian Day scholars which impacted 140 schools across Canada where the students went home each night but still were impacted in various and similar ways as residential school survivors. What we have also learned is that the Indian Day scholar is defined as, in the class action suit, as somebody who attended a residential school but did not stay. However, there are schools that are called Indian Day schools in various First Nations, Inuit, Métis communities that are not included in the Indian Day scholar class action suit. And I'm hoping it's included in the report. However, I haven't had a chance to read it. I just got it today. But I would be remiss if I didn't advocate for those students, I believe prior after 1959, who are not included anywhere. And so I'm not too sure if this can be answered today, but there will be further information coming forward, and we will be looking for your guidance and support along the way. And I'm with the Squamish Nation News, so that's why I'm asking this question on my relations.
Thank you.
Thank you. And as you heard the Prime Minister say, that our government's view of reconciliation is bigger than the court-directed mandate of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And so we want to go higher and broader than that. And so it means that the issues that you raised that are so important, that it's something that the Minister of Justice and I are looking at, and that we do believe that getting things out of the courts is going to be the way forward, and a way that's less painful for so many survivors in some of these complex situations that didn't end up being in the original class action.
Yeah. No, we've been there supporting the Day Scholars class action suit for sure. In fact, I was there in the court in British Columbia. They were forgotten, they were left out. So seeking justice and fairness for all that have been hurt by this whole travesty, we're going to keep supporting that. And I always say it's sometimes you need a legal strategy to put enough pressure on so there's a political strategy going forward, political resolvement for it, but we're going to keep supporting that. And in fact, we have support from our Chiefs Assembly as well, so we're going to keep that pressure on.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your answers. It's been, I think it's been very informative. We will now be moving on to the drumming out of the Eagle staffs and flags. We have another event later on tonight at the Wabano Center. Don't know if all of you will come and join us. As we are drumming out the Eagle staff and the flags, I would like to ask you to rise, please. Thank you. Miigwech.
Oh, I'm like...